Hello. Well, before turning back to Electra, I want to, in preparation for your upcoming papers due on the 23rd, talk about an important component of critical writing that I hope you will bear in mind when you're composing your essays, and that is the use of quotations. Now, the fact is, as I note on the sheet that I attached with this email, that any literary text requires close attention to its language if you're going to analyze it. Knowing how and when to use quotations in the process of that analysis is a crucial skill in writing any kind of effective critical prose. In general, I think you should quote long passages in your essays only if they are extended research papers. For the papers you're writing for this course, no. Okay? In short critical analyses of this kind, it is far better to quote briefly and strategically. Quote frequently, yes, but make the quotations short and integrate them into your own analytic sentences. Instead of quoting entire passages, then, frequent short quotations woven into the fabric of your analysis are the key. Focus on keywords and phrases. For example, in speaking to her sister Chrysothemis, Electra acknowledges that her prolonged grief has left her with, quote, not much of a life, unquote. However, she insists that honoring her dead father's memory and, quote, annoying, end quote, Clytemnestra and Aegisthus with public lamentations is, quote, enough for me. Now, you'll see that the passage develops an idea fully and clearly by incorporating three short quotations within its two analytic sentences, rather than inserting a long quoted passage of many lines between those two statements. The passage integrates important quoted words and phrases within the analytic sentences. So instead of resembling a slab of meat, then, in a sandwich in which the two slices of bread are your sentences and the quotation is the ham, instead of that, the quotations in the passage above are blended more like blueberries in a muffin, and that's what you want to go for here. Now, in using quotations for your short essays, then, here are some rules to follow, and I hope you will attend to them as you are writing and rewriting your first essays. First, as noted, avoid extended passages. Quote only important words and phrases so that in an essay of 5 or 6 pages like this one, I would suggest that you should confine your quotations to no more than 1 or 2 lines, and indeed even fewer if possible. 2. In writing about drama, which you will be doing, citation of the page number of the assigned class text in parentheses after the quotation is the easiest way to do it. Thus, if you're using class text, after you quote, for example, parentheses P31, that's it. If, on the other hand, you're using a different edition, then I would suggest you cite act and scene numbers, or scene numbers if there are no act numbers, as indicated, as for example, Act 2, Scene 3, lines 126 to 127. If you are quoting 2 or more short passages in the same sentence, as in the example I offered above, you can cite those line numbers or page numbers together at the end of the sentence. For example, PP, that means more than one page, 31, and then 32, meaning the first quote was from page 31 and the second from page 32. The important thing to bear in mind is do not use footnotes to cite these primary references, okay? Please bear that in mind. Make it as simple as possible. Okay. Also, if you are using a text not the one assigned in class, a different translation, say, you should attach a works cited page indicating what that text and edition is. All right, number 3. If the play you're discussing is written in verse, then the quotations that include words from 2 successive lines require slash marks to indicate the line breaks because it is poetry. For example, eager to execute his plan, Orestes tells Electra there is, quote, no need to explain. Slash mark, that's the end of one poetic line, and then how vile our mother is. Note that to indicate that, you use slash marks and you retain the capitalization in the next line. It's not prose, okay? Now, whether it is a poetic play or whether it is translated as poetry will determine. Okay, in the case of Electra and Agamemnon, they're written in poetry and they're translated as poetry. In the case of Medea, it's written in poetry, but it's translated as prose. So in the first two cases, you would need to use slash marks. In the case of Medea, you would not. Okay, number 4. Do not use ellipses, that is ... before or after quoting. All right, that's completely unnecessary. The quotation mark indicates that you are quoting. Use ellipses only to indicate that you're leaving a word or word out of a textual passage, which sometimes you will want to do. For example, Agamemnon tells the chorus, quote, "Our bloody lion lapped his fill," and then ellipses, "on the blood of kings." The ellipses here indicate that there is a word or a few words or a phrase in between there, but you don't need it. And so it makes more sense to use the ellipses. The sentence is perfectly grammatically coherent that way. Number 5, do not refer to the fact that you are quoting before you quote. Avoid this, for example. In the following quotation, we see Medea accusing Jason of cowardly behavior. You don't have to announce you're quoting because the act of quotation is evident in itself. When you put quotation marks down, you're quoting. And you don't have to refer to what you're quoting as a quotation. It's only a quotation because you're making it a quotation. All right? Number 6, do not follow quotations with sentences that simply restate what you have quoted. For example, Medea promises Agis, quote, "I will make you able to beget children." All right? Well, do not then immediately after that say, "She says she will enable him to reproduce offspring." It's simply a paraphrase of what she said. No. Use the quotation then to analyze, not to restate the content of the quote. And finally, in the advice I offer on these quotations, and this is perhaps the most important of all, when you integrate quoted passages into your own analytic sentences, be sure that those quotes function as grammatical units within the sentence, okay? Quotation does not exempt the writer from the basic rules of syntax. A quoted passage has to operate within a sentence as if there were no quotation marks, okay? It has to be that grammatically coherent. So the best way to determine if you're quoting grammatically and correctly is to pretend for a moment that the quotation marks are missing. Read the sentence aloud. Does it still make grammatical sense? Is it still syntactically coherent? If so, fine. If not, then you have to revise the way in which you're using the quotation. Consider the following failure to integrate quotations grammatically. At first, Creon refuses Medea's pleas to stay in Corinth by no manner or means. Now, the quoted phrase there, "by no manner or means," is just sort of tacked on and has no clear grammatical relationship to the rest of the sentence. It could, however. So to correct this, if you think that's an important passage or phrase that you want to quote, do it this way. At first, Creon refuses Medea's pleas to stay in Corinth, insisting that, quote, "by no manner or means may she remain in the kingdom." Okay, again, make sure that the quotation functions as a grammatical element within the sentence. Now, the last thing I want to mention is this. In order to make these quotations fit grammatically, you might sometimes have to make slight changes to the words or phrases within the quote, okay? That's fine. You can do that if they are relatively minor. But in order to indicate that you are slightly altering a word or words within the quotation, use brackets to indicate that. For example, as Cassandra envisions the murder of Agamemnon inside the palace, she speaks of the, quote, outrage of, quote, the woman killing the man. Now, the exact phrase she uses, the woman kills the man. But within this sentence, as you are presenting it, grammatically, you would want to say the outrage of the woman killing the man. Thus, you indicate that you have altered the word kills, by putting ing in brackets. All right? Perfectly fine to do that. All right. Now, again, I think it's important that if you have any questions about any aspect of this essay, you get in touch with me either by email or schedule a Zoom chat. All right? I'll be able to help you in any way I can. Let's turn back to Electra now. At the end of Friday's class, we examined the climactic recognition scene in which Orestes reveals himself to his sister. "I'm here at last," he tells Electra, and they embrace. She can scarcely believe her senses. She says, "Is it really you in my arms?" To which Orestes replies, "Hold me forever." Well, in just a few moments, Electra has gone from sorrowfully holding the urn that she thinks contains Orestes' ashes to now holding his flesh and blood in her arms. And he says, "Hold me forever." She is so overwhelmed with happiness that Orestes actually has to shut her up. The moment of action is at hand. There's some urgency here, he reminds her. And he must assign Electra her role in the carefully timed plan. And so he says, "Enough of words, Electra. No duty to explain to me how vile our mother is, or how Agestheus is draining our father's wealth by his extravagance and waste. Talking could make us miss the crucial moment. Here is the question that needs an answer now. Where should we now? Where should we show our presence, or should we wait in ambush?" Well, he's already decided. He's decided to show their presence. And so he says, "When the two of us go inside, our mother mustn't suspect what's going on. Treat the false report of my death as though it were true." So Electra's role in this plan is to go inside the palace with Orestes and pretend to be mourning him. And Orestes hopes that Clytemnestra will mistake Electra's tears of joy for tears of sorrow in order to maintain the deception. Orestes feels sure that Clytemnestra is not going to recognize that he is her son. After all, she hasn't seen him since he was a toddler, and she now assumes that he is dead anyway. The old slave reinforces the need to act at this precise moment, at what he had earlier called this final crossroads. Orestes, he says, must now take revenge or miss the opportunity. Quote, "Now stop this endless talking and these cries of insatiable joy," he tells Electra. "The moment's come to be shot of your task, Orestes." Yes, he is even more aware of the urgent need for perfect timing here than Orestes is. Well, Electra at this moment appeals to two gods for support in their retribution. And ironically, they're the same two gods that Clytemnestra had prayed to earlier. First, she asks Artemis for strength. Now, although Artemis demanded the sacrifice of Iphigenia, Electra's appeal to this virgin goddess is certainly more appropriate than Clytemnestra's prayer to Artemis had been, because Electra is at least a virgin, while Clytemnestra is an adulteress driven by lust. Electra also prays to Apollo, as her mother had, but not for protection, but rather to aid them in their vengeance, or as she puts it, quote, "to show all mankind what recompense the gods bestow on sinful wickedness." Now, this prayer to Apollo also makes sense, because remember, Apollo advised Orestes at Delphi to use deception against Clytemnestra, and Electra's own counterfeit sorrow in the palace will be part of that deception. Yet, even though Electra knows that Orestes is about to kill their mother, I hope you noted that she still doesn't use the words murder or killing or bloodshed in her prayer to Apollo. Instead, Electra uses the euphemisms enterprise and recompense. It's the same instinctive moral aversion to matricide that had kept Electra from envisioning shedding Clytemnestra's blood earlier, even when she was urging her sister to help her butcher Agestheus. Well, Electra, as we'll see, will soon get over these moral qualms. The chorus, however, has no ethical compunction about bloodshed at this point. These Mycenaean women fully support Orestes' plan to stab Clytemnestra to death. As they envision the murder, they liken him to Hermes. Hermes was the god of deception, appropriately, and they imagine Orestes moving through the palace, quote, with wily tread, preparing to, quote, ambush his wicked mother. Now, Electra does not directly participate in or even witness this murder. Orestes stabs Clytemnestra to death entirely on his own in this version of the story, just as he has planned the killing entirely on his own. It is interesting that Sophocles presents then both Electra and Clytemnestra, the play's two women, two of the three women, as less capable of initiating violent action than either Aeschylus or Euripides do. They both grant women in their plays, these women in particular, much greater violent agency. In Agamemnon, Clytemnestra, as we've seen, plans and kills her husband with her own hands, while in Sophocles' version of Electra, we learn that Aegisthus had actually planned the murder of Agamemnon, and Clytemnestra had helped to execute it. And he had helped Clytemnestra to execute it. And also note that Electra relies on Orestes' planning and action here. As a woman, she feels completely powerless in a way that the women in Aeschylus and Euripides are not. Certainly not in Euripides when we consider Medea, who exults in the murders that she plans and even slays her own children with her own hands. Now, in the closing scene, Electra returns from the palace to the stage to guard against Aegisthus's return, while Orestes remains inside, offstage, to perform the execution of his mother. Well, standing outside, Electra merely hears the death cries of Clytemnestra, along with the audience. But her reaction to what she hears shocks us, and it marks a profound, decisive, and disturbing change in her character. This closing scene is shocking not just because Orestes slaughters his mother in cold blood without any hesitation, but it's even more shocking because of Electra's unexpected reaction of exultation. She responds with bloodthirsty delight as she hears Clytemnestra being slaughtered inside the palace. She can now readily envision what she had earlier been afraid even to name. We find that as Clytemnestra is saying, "Oof, Aegisthus, where are you?" Electra says, "Another cry there." And then Clytemnestra again is heard to say, my son, have mercy on your mother." Outside Electra, we hear, says, "You had no mercy on him, my father, nor on his father before him." The chorus says, "City of Argos, house of Atreus, now the destiny dogging your days is waning fast." Clytemnestra again, struck with the knife, says, I'm struck." And Clytemnestra then says, "Strike her a second blow." Electra says, "If you have the strength." Clytemnestra again, again. And Electra, "I wish Aegisthus were lying beside you, lying by your side." To which the chorus adds, "The deadly curse is now at work, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The dead below are stirring up to life, and now the old slain suck their killer's blood dry." Now, note that part of Clytemnestra's punishment, as we hear the conversation inside the palace, part of her punishment is that Orestes reveals himself to her as his son while he's killing her, thereby forcing his mother to see how she was tricked. Just as you remember in Aeschylus' Agamemnon, Clytemnestra forces Agamemnon to see how she tricked him as she's stabbing him to death in the bathtub. Thus, it seems appropriate that she suffer the same painful discovery in death. Now, as this is going on, Electra is unmoved by her mother's cries of terror and agony and her appeals for mercy. "Please, please." No, instead, Electra shouts, "You had no mercy on my father." She's no longer morally conflicted, no longer fearful of the idea of killing a blood relation. Rather, Electra now revels in the murder as she hears it. She imagines how it's happening and exults in the sounds of Clytemnestra's pain. "Strike her a second blow," Electra cries, even though this is shedding of kindred blood, a violation of that cultural taboo that earlier Electra had respected and feared. Now, earlier, you'll remember, Electra condemned Clytemnestra's justifications for killing her father because she said, that's blood for blood and you're going to pay for that, Mom. But the problem is, of course, so is this. This is the killing of Electra and Orestes' own blood, the woman who gave birth to them. But now, Electra doesn't care. She regards murder as the appropriate retribution for her mother's crime now. Her scruples have vanished. Now, the psychological and moral change in Electra in this closing scene is as sudden as the change in her fortunes in the reunion scene with Orestes. We're meant to be shocked by this abrupt transformation. Now, There's also a shocking change in the chorus that I had alluded to earlier at this time. The women of Mycenae in the chorus who had warned Electra against losing emotional control now seem to be losing balance themselves. As they listen to the chorus and to the killing in the passage I read, the chorus goes beyond merely supporting it as an act of justice. Now they share Electra's bloodthirsty delight in this, quote, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth bloodletting. They see the execution of Clytemnestra as an inevitability, as part of what they call the house of Atreus that Agamemnon's father first incurred when he killed his brother's children. The curse that the now dead Thyestes pronounced against Atreus and his descendants has, the chorus said, now come fully to manifest itself again with the killing of Agamemnon's killer. Now, it's interesting that the chorus regards these events, as I've noted, as predetermined, as a matter of destiny, as they put it. The deadly curse is now at work, whereas both Orestes and Electra tend to speak of the killing as a deliberate act of free will born of careful planning. Well, perhaps the greatest shock of all in this closing scene is that neither the chorus, nor Electra, nor Orestes exhibit the slightest guilt or remorse over Clytemnestra's demise. When Orestes comes out, and we can imagine him covered with blood, Electra merely asks, is that vile woman dead? Well, overall, her behavior then, I think, raises two questions. First, how do we explain the drastic transformation in Electra from a woman who was morally conflicted earlier at the prospect of killing her mother, now into one who celebrates the murder in a kind of violent delirium? Strike a second blow! It would seem that Electra has repressed her own urge for violent aggression for so many years that when it comes out with a kind of vengeance and volatility. It's been building, and when it breaks loose, as so many things do when they're repressed, it comes in the form of a frenzy as she urges Orestes to stab her mother again and again. The second, more challenging question, I think, is this. How does Sophocles want us to react to Electra's passionate thirst for her mother's blood? Now, her sanguine responses really border on the barbaric. It's not just a loss of balance. It seems to go beyond that. Indeed, there is in her mutterings, stab her again, something that seems almost sadistic. She enjoys her mother's death throes as she hears them. I am struck, cries Clytemnestra. And when Electra hears that and her begging for mercy, she mocks it. Hey, you didn't have any mercy on my father. In short, Electra seems out of control, as overpowered now by her bloodlust and vengeance as she had been earlier overpowered and dominated by her grief. There is no sense of balance or proportion here. No sooner has Orestes dispatched Clytemnestra than Electra wants more. She says the first round is won, she tells him, make sure of the second. In other words, be sure to butcher Aegisthus too when he gets back and make him suffer too. So, as I said, the question then is, how does Sophocles want the reader or the viewer who has sympathized with Electra's suffering and admired her moral self-awareness and shared her joy in Orestes' return, how does he want us to respond now to this? Well, part of the fascination of the play, I think, is that Sophocles doesn't make it clear how he wants us to judge Electra. And if you think of it, how could he make it explicit? Drama is the most impersonal literary form. There is no place for an author in a play to comment directly on how we should react, or to tell us through a narrator, as a novelist can, how we're meant to judge the characters. So there is always, I think, in a play, a greater challenge to the reader to judge, especially in a play as ambiguous as this. But let us remember that while I think he leaves the judgment to us, some judgments are perhaps more plausible than others. Remember that Sophocles is writing a tragedy. And according to Aristotle, there has to be something at the end of the play then to create pity and fear in the viewer, rather than moral satisfaction at seeing evildoers killed. There has to be something that fills us with a sense of pity and fear through our identification with the protagonist, Electra. Well, where is the tragedy then at the end of this play? Is there a tragedy in which we can speak of Electra as a tragic protagonist? Well, I think that the tragedy at the end of the play lies in Electra's moral perversion, in her unfortunate change from a woman of conscience who suffers for that conscience to a woman who relishes the suffering of her enemies in ways that go beyond retributive justice and far beyond the Greek ideal of balance. We have pitied Electra all along, as I've noted, in her suffering, in her frustration, in her isolation, and we have shared her joyful reunion with her brother. But her behavior in the closing scene, I think, fills us with fear. Why? Because having identified with Electra in the ways I've just described, we now sense fearfully that we too could lose our moral compass, that we too could descend into a kind of barbarism if it can happen to such a noble, self-aware woman. It can happen to us. It can happen to anyone. In short, I don't think we simply jettison our sympathetic identification with her. I think that sympathetic identification with her makes us fearful that we could behave this way too, in this way that seems such a shocking moral declension. Excess is clearly a part of Electra's character. She has always been prone to over-emotionality. So this kind of outburst at the end is not implausible. First, there was the over-emotionality in the extremity of her grief in mourning her father, and now we find it in the extremity of her exultation at revenge. Both reveal, I think, a dangerous loss of mental and moral equilibrium, but all the more serious and all the more troubling now at the end of the play. We see Electra's violent loss of emotional control again when Aegisthus returns. She's been waiting outside the palace at Orestes' orders to look out for Aegisthus and to deter him if he arrives while Orestes is dispatching Clytemnestra. When Electra sees Aegisthus approaching, she's thrilled that, quote, he's rushing headlong into Justice's ambush. But first, she enjoys deceiving him into thinking that Orestes is dead, telling him that Orestes' corpse has been brought back and is lying inside the palace. She refers to the messenger finding his way to Clytemnestra's heart. It is, of course, a dark, private pun, but one that she knows Aegisthus will understand only when he sees that the so-called messenger has indeed stabbed Clytemnestra in the heart, not warmed her heart with a report of Orestes' death. And he will find that out abruptly when he sees the corpse that is brought out doesn't belong to Orestes, but is that rather of his adulterous lover, Clytemnestra. Well, as Electra cynically puts it in referring to the corpse that he has not yet seen and assumes is Orestes, it's not a pretty sight. Again, there's a kind of wicked delight in the way she's doing this. Having felt helpless for so many years, Electra enjoys the power behind this trickery and the added shock and pain that she knows these words will cause Aegisthus when he remembers them. Aegisthus, who imagines that Orestes is now safely dead, but who will realize that Orestes is going to kill him and that Electra was teasing him with these puns beforehand. Ironically, Electra's love of deception here reminds us that she is, after all, her mother's daughter, as well as Orestes' sister. They all traffic now in deception. When Orestes comes out of the palace, Aegisthus, like Clytemnestra, fails to recognize him and assumes that he is indeed the messenger from Delphi that Electra referred to, announcing that Orestes has died in an accident. But when Orestes lifts the shroud to reveal the dead face of Clytemnestra, Orestes sarcastically tells Aegisthus, "Don't you realize you've been exchanging words with a man who's dead?" Ha ha! Again, we marvel at Orestes' careful timing. When Aegisthus realizes that he's been tricked and is now trapped, his braggadocio tone changes now from bullying to supplication. Like Clytemnestra, he begs for mercy. But consider Electra's reaction to this begging on his part. She will have none of it. Rather, when he begs, he says, "I'm at your mercy. Please allow me a word, just one." Before Orestes can even speak, Electra says, "No, Orestes, for God's sake, don't give him the chance to argue with you. When a man's been caught and is doomed to die, what can he gain by a moment's delay? Kill him at once. Kill him. And then throw out his corpse for the dogs and the birds to bury out of sight. No other payment. That's it." Now, note that it is now Electra, not Orestes, who is concerned about the urgency of timing. Kill him now before he has a chance to make any kind of appeal. And then she says, once you've killed him, let's defile his body by throwing it out for the birds and the dogs to consume. Orestes insists on killing Aegisthus, not on the spot though, but rather inside the palace where Aegisthus and Clytemnestra had murdered Agamemnon. He sees that location as not just fitting, but as in some way the place for the fulfillment of justice. But like Electra, Orestes also wants his victim to suffer, and he enjoys that the same way she does. Like Electra, Orestes is a bit of a sadist in this scene. Just before they go in, Orestes points to Aegisthus and says, "You first," Aegisthus says. "Afraid I'll escape?" To which Orestes replies, "No. I'd rather you didn't enjoy your execution, but died in agony. All who presume to defy the law ought to be punished at once like this. Kill them. Crime would not be so rife then." Thus they go in. I want you to suffer, okay? I don't want you to enjoy anything, and I'm not going to do it quickly, perhaps as you would like. Now, note that Sophocles presents this killing not just as an execution, but as a ruthless murder in which Orestes and Electra take unmistakable pleasure, while also insisting that it is absolutely justified. As the play ends, both of them, along with the chorus, go into the palace where Aegisthus will be hacked to death. Remember, in this version of the story in Sophocles, Aegisthus actually participated in the murder of Agamemnon, whereas he did not in Aeschylus's Agamemnon. Note, though, that as they go in to kill him in the palace, Electra now will witness that killing. We don't, but she will, and she's very eager to, all too eager to. Both her rapacious desire for blood and Orestes at the end of the play are really unpleasant, but they're tragic in her case because of her sensitive moral nature, which has now been corrupted, it seems, in the fulfillment of the long-delayed retribution she desired. It's less tragic for Orestes because he has never been that morally sensitive, nor have we identified with him the way we identified with and sympathized with her. But as I've noted, the most disturbing feature of all at the end of this play is that there is no indication that Orestes or Electra will suffer any guilt or punishment even in the future. And this is important because Sophocles' treatment of the story in this respect also differs sharply from those that we find in Aeschylus and Euripides, both of which, by the way, preceded this play, and both of which an ancient Greek audience would have been aware of. Now, Euripides, let's start with Orestes. In Aeschylus, in the last part of Aeschylus's Oresteia, Orestes is punished by the gods for killing his mother and is beset with the Furies, these bird-like creatures who descend on him and shriek constantly around his head as a form of punishment, but also as a kind of external manifestation of his own corrosive guilt, of the terrible remorse he feels, driving him almost to the point of madness. Okay? No suggestion that's going to happen here in Electra. Also, in Euripides, play, Electra. At the end of that, Electra urges Orestes to shed blood even more insistently than Electra does here, but afterward, both the brother and sister are tormented by guilt for their killings. And again, no sense that either of them is going to feel any sense of moral guilt in the future here. But there is, I think, no evidence that that will ever happen, because the sister and brother here seem morally tainted by a kind of savage delirium, but without the expected remorse, and even without the chorus to remind them that you've gone too far, because the chorus shares their feelings. Orestes never seems to have had any ethical scruples to begin with, but Electra did, and this inner tension in her gave her the tragic stature that we now see tainted, but which becomes the essence of her tragedy at the end. So for many readers, including me, I think the ultimate tragedy in Sophocles' Electra is a kind of figurative death, not the actual death that we find so often in Greek tragedy of the protagonist, but rather, at the end of this play, the death, if you will, of Electra as a moral human being. That's tragic. One final question. You remember that Aristotle says that in Greek tragedy, the protagonist always suffers from a hamartia, that is, a mistake or error in judgment that may or may not arise from a flaw in character. If we apply that idea to Electra, what is her mistake, and what, if any, flaw causes it? Well, I would suggest that her tragic mistake, her hamartia, is not so much the killing themselves as her behavior during them, the excess of her bloodlust, and that arises from the primary weakness in her otherwise noble character, her hyper-emotionalism that causes her to lose her mental balance. She gives into her dominant emotion, be it grief or savage rage, and in doing so, takes everything way too far. Okay. Now, we begin the last of the three great Greek tragedians' works, Euripides' Medea. And in turning to it, a bit of background may be helpful. Euripides was the youngest of the three great Greek tragedians, and more of his plays have survived than either have survived of Aeschylus or Sophocles. Each of them, we only have 7 plays, but with Euripides there are 18 that have remained and are extant. Now, Euripides seems to have been the most controversial of the three playwrights. He won the prize at the City of Dionysus competition only 4 times during a long life, fewer than Aeschylus or Sophocles, and he left Athens 2 years before his death, traveling to the court of a king in far-off Macedonia to the north. It's unclear why Euripides left or why he won the prize so infrequently, but some have suggested that both were due to his famous irreverence. His tragedies are far more bitter, more ironic, even more morally problematical than Aeschylus's and Sophocles. The behavior of both his protagonists, like Medea, and the gods in his play shocks us with its extreme violence and its chilling self-interest. This irreverence, really bordering on cynicism, I think, about human nature, is one of the disturbing features of his work, but it is also one of the most distinguishing features. A second distinguishing feature, and one that I'll be reiterating in Euripides, is the unparalleled psychological depth and complexity that he builds into his characters. And a third defining trait that sets him apart, I think, from Aeschylus and Sophocles is his pronounced fascination with and sympathy for women. He may be very often acerbic and cynical about human nature, but he is decidedly more sympathetic to women than to men. Most of his tragic protagonists are women, as reflected in the titles of his plays, many of them drawn from Homer's epics. They include the plays Helen, Iphigenia at Aulis, and Electra, all of which treat the house of Atreus. Other Euripides tragedies focus on groups of suffering females, such as the Trojan women, the suppliant women, and the Phoenician women. Well, like his individual female protagonists, these groups of women protest their powerless plight within patriarchal Greek culture. And some of these women, like Medea, actively rebel against patriarchy. Now, this gender politics in Euripides was likely a source of controversy and probably unsettled his audiences. Remember that there would have been no women in those audiences, only men. No woman in all Greek tragedy protests more eloquently against patriarchy or rebels more outrageously than Medea, who is probably Euripides' single greatest and most vivid creation. Medea's denunciation of the subjugation of women might have registered with a contemporary audience in Greece in 1431, certainly an audience of women, if only women had been there to see the play. But of course, as we've noted, the plays were available only for male patrons. Medea would have herself been played by a young man, just as Electra and Clytemnestra would, and all the other female characters in Greek tragedy. But the fact is that even today, Medea still has the power to provoke and engage and shock audiences. Why? Well, like Agamemnon and Electra, remember, this is a revenge tragedy we're reading, featuring an aggrieved woman, Medea, who takes her rage to extremes, but to such extremes that go far beyond what we just found so shocking in Electra. To punish her husband, Jason, for leaving her to marry the young princess Glace in Corinth, Medea schemes, poisons the princess and her father, King Creon, and kills her two young children that she bore to Jason with her own hands. And all of that to punish him, and she gets away with these slayings to a large degree, appearing, as we'll see at the end of the play, above the skein in an airborne chariot held aloft by the machina, with the boys' bodies draped over the sides. She is not, however, savagely joyful like Sophocles' Electra, but neither is she punished by the gods for infanticide, as many viewers expect she will be and should be. After all, Clytemnestra's murder of Agamemnon led to her own murder, and the gods punish Orestes' killing of Clytemnestra in the Oresteia by afflicting him with the Furies. There's no suggestion anything like that is going to happen here. How do we feel about Medea at the end of the play? Well, there's no question that the play generates pity and fear in the audience, but many would say it's a fear of Medea rather than the Aristotelian fear rooted in sympathy that we could suffer a similar fate in her position. Yet remember that Aristotle writes in the Poetics that, quote, Euripides is felt to be the most tragic of the great dramatic poets. Well, if Medea is tragic then, it is surely a complex sense of tragedy that shatters our civilized conventions and challenges our ethical judgment even more than Sophocles' Electra does. I think that our judgment of Medea requires, then, an understanding of what has occurred before the play begins. So it helps to know the full backstory, which I'll try to provide now. It all started with Jason's pursuit of the fabled Golden Fleece with a group of his countrymen from his home city of Iolcus. The ship was called the Argo, and these men, his crewmates, were called the Argonauts. Now, the Golden Fleece is kept by King Aeetes in the remote and rather backward northern kingdom of Kolkos. Aeetes is Medea's father. For Aeetes, the Golden Fleece is a cherished symbol of his power and authority, and all the other rulers in Greece jealously crave the fleece because of its supernatural origins. The Golden Fleece was the skin of a golden flying ram that belonged to Zeus, the head of all the gods in the Greek pantheon. Jason is actually ordered to get the fleece by his uncle, King Peleus, who usurped the throne of his homeland, Iolcus, from Jason's father. Well, hoping to get rid of Jason this way, Peleus tells him that he can inherit the throne after Peleus, dies, only if Jason brings back the fleece. And Jason does so, much to Peleus's astonishment. But Jason succeeds in this quest only because of Medea, who falls in love with him almost immediately and helps Jason secretly behind her father's back. When Jason arrives in Kolkos, King Aeetes told him that he could have the fleece only if he accomplished three seemingly impossible tasks. First, he must plow a field using fire-breathing bulls attached to the plow. Medea gives him an unguent to keep him from being burned alive And in covering his hands and arms with this, he succeeds in plowing that field with these fire-breathing monsters. Aeetes next tells Jason that he must then plant the plowed field with dragon's teeth, each of which instantly will rise up as an armed warrior, ready to kill him. But Medea forewarns and advises Jason so that he is able to toss a rock, and the confused warriors, once they emerge from the ground, converge on that rock, fight, and kill one another. Well, Aeetes never expected Jason to get this far, and he certainly doesn't want to part with the fleece. So finally he tells Jason that to acquire it, he must kill a sleepless dragon that guards the golden fleece. Well, Medea has been so smitten by Jason that she again betrays her father by helping him. She uses her special powers as a witch, and indeed she is a witch, to make a potion that puts the beast, the dragon, to sleep, allowing Jason to slay it and abscond, sail away with the fleece. Now, it's crucial to note that Medea helped Jason only after getting him to promise that he would marry her in exchange for his success. And so he does marry her after sailing away from Colchis with her. In their marriage, Medea bears Jason 2 children, but she has fled her homeland with a heavy sense of guilt, because for Jason she has betrayed her father, and also, just as they were leaving, killed her brother who tried to stop Jason when he saw him sailing away with the golden fleece. In short, Medea has given up everything for Jason and absorbed a considerable amount of guilt in the process. The crimes against her family haunt her. She did it all, though, for love. And now, at the beginning of Medea, we understand that Jason has betrayed her love. At the start of the play, Medea finds herself not, as she had hoped, part of the royal family in Jason's home city of Iocalis. No, for reasons we'll learn, rather than living in that city, they are living in exile in the city of Corinth, far away, where Jason has taken Medea and the 2 children in what she now realizes was his opportunistic attempt and success to marry King Creon's daughter, Glauce. Now, marrying that princess means, of course, casting off Medea as his wife, which he has done just before the play opens. Thus, Medea finds herself a stranger in a strange land, aggrieved and furious, because the man for whom she sacrificed everything has dumped her for a younger, politically connected woman in his pursuit of wealth and power. Now he will be on the throne and inherit the throne of Corinth. Well, the play opens with the nurse, Medea's longtime retainer and confidant from her own homeland, lamenting in front of Medea's house where all of the action will occur. Jason is now living in the royal palace, away from her. The nurse's lamentation fulfills the function that's usually assigned to the chorus, in it that it fills us in on past events. Here, the nurse has to do it, however, because the chorus, composed of Corinthian women, hardly know Medea or her history. They don't know her the way the chorus and Electra know Electra. So, at the beginning of the play, we find a good deal of information provided by this elderly woman. How I wish the Argo never reached the land of Colchis, skimming through the blue Symplegades, nor ever had fallen in the glades of Pelion, the smitten fir tree to furnish oars for the hands of heroes who in Peleus' name attempted the golden fleece. For then my mistress Medea would not have sailed for the towers of the land of Ioclus, her heart on fire with passionate love for Jason, nor would she have persuaded the daughters of Peleus to kill their father and now be living here in Corinth with her husband and children. She gave pleasure to the people of her land of exile, and she herself helped Jason in every way. This is indeed the greatest salvation of all, for the wife not to stand apart from the husband. But now there's hatred everywhere. Love is diseased. For deserting his own children and my mistress, Jason has taken a royal bride to bed, the daughter of the ruler of this land, Creon. And poor Medea is slighted and cries aloud on the vows they made to each other, the right hands clasped in the eternal promise. She calls upon the gods to witness what sort of return Jason has made of her love. And she lies without food and gives herself up to suffering, wasting every moment of the day in tears, so that it's gone since she knew herself slighted by him, not stirring an eye, not moving her face from the ground, no more than either a rock or a surging seawater. She listens when she is given a friendly advice, except that sometimes she twists back her white neck and moans to herself, calling out to her father's name and her land and her home betrayed when she came away with a man who now is determined to dishonor her. Poor creature, poor creature. She's discovered by her sufferings everything. Now, the nurse expresses her regret and pity for Medea alone on stage in this soliloquy, and she stresses how much Jason owes Medea. She not only helped him get the coveted fleece, but when they returned to his home, Ioclus, she persuaded the daughters of the reigning king Peleus to kill Peleus, thus enabling Jason to take the throne immediately. Well, as the queen there in Ioclus, Medea, we're told, brought happiness and well-being to the people of her adoptive land for a time. But Jason proved to be an inept ruler, and his ambition and wanderlust led him to Corinth. The nurse stresses Medea's passionate love for Jason, and all of the tears that she has shed now at the betrayal of that love. She also stresses the sense of guilt that haunts Medea because of the betrayals of her father and killing of her brother that she enacted for Jason. Now, note that Medea confirms this sense of bitter regret that she ever went away with Jason and betrayed her father, even before she appears on stage. Rather, we find that from within inside her own house, she cries out and says, "Oh, I wish that lightning from heaven would split my head open. Oh, Father, oh, my country, what dishonor I left you, killing my own brother." She's filled with rage at Jason, but also with a deep sense of regret and guilt. Now, note that Medea finds herself isolated, depressed, grief-stricken, and guilt-ridden toward her father. But above all, she is enraged. And the nurse prepares us for this rage and its consequences by stressing Jason's eternal vows to her, which have now been broken. And note that this breakage on his part is a betrayal that is completely unjustified, because unlike Medea's betrayal of her father, which was driven by love, Jason's betrayal of Medea as his wife, his jettisoning her for another woman, is driven not by love of Glatze, but merely by a kind of desire, calculated desire for political advantage. Well, the nurse pities Medea deeply, much in the same way that the chorus pities Electra. And like that chorus, the nurse also fears for Medea's sanity, as the chorus in Electra feared for her sanity. But there's this difference. The nurse also fears for the lives of others. In her soliloquy, after lamenting what Medea has suffered, she goes further and suddenly pivots when she thinks about Medea's children. She is turned from the children and does not like to see them. I am afraid she may think of some dreadful thing, for her heart is violent. She will never put up with the treatment she is getting. I know and fear her, lest she may sharpen a sword and thrust to the heart, stealing into the palace where the bed is made, or even kill the king and the new wedded groom, and thus bring a greater misfortune on herself. She is a strange woman. In short, having known Medea a long time, the nurse knows that given her rage and volatility, she's capable of anything. She could kill Jason, she could kill Glatze, and she doesn't like the way she looks even at her own children. Well, there's certainly something prophetic in that fear. Medea, as she says, is a strange woman indeed. Nothing is beyond her. And she's strange in part because, unlike most women, including the Corinthian women, we'll see, Medea refuses to accept the condition of female powerless subjugation, a condition that women like, say, Electra's sister Chrysothemis accept so readily, and that even Electra seemed to accept when she felt she couldn't do anything without Orestes. No, That's not Medea. The old nurse predicts Medea's murder of the princess as a strong possibility, but the most troubling detail in her opening monologue is the mention of her refusal to look at her own children. Why might that be? Well, partly because the two sons by Jason are a reminder of him. Indeed, they bear the image of their father. And just as she hates Jason, so too there's a sense that when she looks at them, she hates them both by being reminded of him and also because they are the product of his loins, and as such, a reminder of his betrayal. She hates them as a reflection of the husband who left her. And Medea indeed acknowledges that hatred. She says that, I have suffered. What should be wept for bitterly? I hate you, children of a hateful mother. I curse you and your father. Let the whole house crash. She is capable of letting the whole house crash, she says, of destroying herself and them out of a hatred for them as a reminder of Jason and as partly Jason's flesh and blood. Wow. Now one assumes that she also, as a mother, loves them in some way, but she doesn't acknowledge that at this moment. The nurse fears that Medea is fully capable of killing them because of their resemblance to and reminder of the father. But it's also notable that she doesn't yet understand that the reason Medea will eventually do that, will slay her own children, is not out of simple hatred for them as a reflection of him, but rather as a way of tormenting Jason by killing them. That's a perversity that doesn't even occur to the nurse at this point. Well, the nurse, not surprisingly, wants to protect the small boys by keeping them away from their mother's gaze. The only thing more dangerous, one might say, than her refusing to look at her children is when she does look at her children. Thus, the nurse says, "Run indoors quickly, children. It's clear that she soon will put lightning in that cloud of her cries that is rising with a passion increasing. Oh, what will she do, proud-hearted and not to be checked in her course?" Now, you'll note that when the children first came out on stage, before the nurse tells them to go back inside for their own protection, they had come out with their tutor. And the tutor has brought a rumor. This figure, who has been around as long as the nurse, he's brought a rumor that seems to present still more misery for Medea. He says she is now to be driven out of Corinth, away from Jason and King Creon. Now, Creon is eager to do this, to exile her from Corinth, where she is already a kind of exile, because Creon has heard about Medea's violent conduct in the past, and more important, he knows about her powers as a witch, and he certainly doesn't want to risk someone who was killed in the past and has the power of the supernatural on her side in his kingdom. That would be rather too risky, particularly since she knows she's angry. He also, Creon, wants Jason to start a new line of succession for the throne with his daughter Glauce. So that's another reason why Creon wants to send Medea and her children away, out of the kingdom. In doing so, of course, he's consigning them to homelessness. They may be exiles in Corinth, but they have a house. He doesn't care where they go, anywhere but here. They're homeless, or will be if they leave. So the tutor, in reporting this, is even more cynical than the nurse about the way in which Medea has been treated. While he sympathizes with Medea, he's not surprised by Jason's behavior, though. He knows that this is the way men usually act. Indeed, the tutor tells the nurse, "Have you only just discovered that everyone loves himself more than his neighbor?" That's a line reflecting the kind of cynicism, the kind of astringent view of human nature that many people in Euripides' own time seem to find distasteful in him. Well, he says, of course this is what he would do. Of course, he, like every other man, loves himself more than his neighbor. So Jason neglects his children for his new bride. Yes, thus the tutor. Now, as with Electra, at the beginning of the play, we hear Medea before we see her. Remember, we heard first Electra moaning indoors before she appeared on stage? Well, we hear Medea mournfully crying off from inside her house before we see her. When she appears, the first thing Medea says is that she wishes she could die to escape her suffering, much as Electra had expressed a desire to die early in the play, especially even more later after the news of Orestes' death. But now one of the first things we hear from Medea is, "Oh, I wish that lightning from heaven would split my head open. Oh, what use have I now for life? I would find my release in death and leave this hateful existence behind. Oh, I would I could do that." Now, note that, like the chorus in Electra, in response to this lamentation, the old nurse urges moderation, balance, self-control, both for Medea's sake, but also for the children's. When she hears her mistress lamenting this way, she says that, "How can your children share in their father's wickedness? Why do you hate them? Oh, children, how I fear that something may happen to you." And then turning, she says, "What is moderate, Medea, sounds best. Also in practice is best for everyone. Greatness brings no profit to people. Moderate is best. Be moderate." The exact same word invoking the Greek ideal of moderation and equilibrium that we saw in Electra. Now, this plea, as it did in Electra, falls on deaf ears. Medea's indignation and rage and drive for revenge are even more powerful than her death wish. She is even more hyper-emotional, if you will, than Electra. And in her first long speech to the chorus, Medea reveals the volatility of her temperament as she vacillates between various emotional extremes: sorrow, rage, guilt, and remorse. At any given moment, one of these seems to dominate, but they're all present within her, though, as I've suggested, rage is the most powerful. Now, the chorus of local women have heard about Medea, okay? They've never met her before. And from what they know about her, betrayed and exiled there, they pity her. And especially they pity her when they hear her moaning inside her house as they stand out in front. But unlike Electra's chorus, because they scarcely know her, when they hear her lamentation, they do not quite know what to expect. And so, not knowing Medea, as the nurse does, they offer some rather ill-advised advice. They advise in what they hope will be a soothing piece of counsel that she simply accept her plight as a woman, because it's something that she cannot change. Indeed, before they ever see her, based on what they hear, she says, "Suppose your man gives honor to another's bed. It often happens. Don't be hurt. God will be your friend in this. You must not waste away grieving too much for him who shared your bed. He's simply, honoring another woman's bed." Now, the idea that she would take comfort in this, of course, is incredible. Basically, they're saying, you're not alone. Men often take other wives. Look at it this way. He's not betraying you so much as honoring the bed of another. In short, the chorus at this point is an apologist for the patriarchy and for male injustice. Medea is about to challenge that patriarchy and about to punish Jason. But of course, they don't yet know her. Still inside the house, off stage at this point, she hears this advice, which she can only find, of course, misguided, demeaning, and contemptible, even if it's well-intentioned. But note, while Medea certainly feels that way, she doesn't denounce the women of the chorus when, a moment later, she appears and begins talking to them on stage. As we'll see, she does this strategically. She needs the silence of this group of Corinthian women regarding her plans. But before she can get their silence, she needs their active support as women. She needs their sympathy. And that means, of course, changing their view about gender roles and about Greek patriarchy, rather than accommodating themselves to it and suggesting that, yes, this is the way men are and we simply must put up with it. she must in some way get them to recognize that they too are victimized. Thus, she offers them this remarkable protest, which is directed not just against Jason, but against the injustice of Greek men in general. She says, "My own husband has turned out wholly vile. Of all things which are living and can form a judgment, we women are the most unfortunate creatures. Firstly, with an excess of wealth, it is required for us to buy a husband and to take our bodies as and take for our bodies a master. For not to take one is even worse. And now the question is serious whether we take a good one or a bad one. For there is no easy escape. For women, nor can she say no to her marriage, she arrives among her modes of behavior and manners, and needs prophetic power. And unless she has learned at home how best to manage him who shares her bed with her, and if we work out all this well and carefully, and the husband lives with us and lightly bears his yoke, then life is enviable. If not, I'd rather die. A man, when he's tired of company in his home, goes out of the house and puts an end to boredom and turns to a friend or a companion of his own age. But we're forced to keep our eyes on one alone, our husband. What they say to us is that we have a peaceful time living at home while they do the fighting and war. But how wrong they are. I would very much rather stand 3 times in front of a battle than bear 1 child. Yet what applies to me does not apply to you, because you at least have a country." Now, let's consider this. It is an eloquent and compelling assault on gender equality in ancient Greece. Women, Medea says, are limited and victimized at every point in their lives. To marry, they must bring money to the union. And then they must submit to the mastery of their husbands when they're married. Nor, she says, can a woman refuse marriage to a man who wants to marry her, even if she doesn't love him. And worst of all, you wind up an old maid if you don't marry at all. Not securing a husband leaves a woman unsupported and alone. It's a terrible bind. Now, Medea knows that the women in the chorus are familiar with these inequities, and she's trying to change their perspective. She's playing on their familiarity with the things that she describes, but she notes that her own situation is somewhat different. Well, it's different both in the way we'll see she explains, but in other ways as well that she doesn't quite mention. First, she chose Jason and persuaded him to marry her. So she was not chosen the way most women in ancient Greece would be chosen by a man in marriage. She was a far more active force, but she knows that these women were not. And though she did purchase Jason, in a sense, by helping him to get the golden fleece, it was not a kind of monetary transaction of the kind that these women had to bring to their marriages. Also, unlike these women, Medea was motivated in marriage by passionate love, not by social custom or a need to marry out of some material necessity, which she knows is the situation of most Greek women. Medea goes on to complain about other injustices in the passage I read that she knows these women of the chorus have experienced. She wants to, in recounting these injustices that they take for granted, awaken them, shake them out of their passive compliance. She notes that men are free to amuse themselves when they're bored with domestic life, go out with their friends and leave the house, while women are stuck at home. Without knowing these women, Medea understands their situation and plays on what they do share then. And in doing so, she builds a foundation for female solidarity. But having stressed then what they share as women and left out some of the things that they do not, Medea cleverly ends her speech by noting that her situation is far worse than theirs, thereby appealing to the chorus's pity, which she will certainly need in order to ensure their support and their silence. You at least have a country. Your family home is here. You enjoy life in the company of your friends, but I am deserted, a refugee, thought nothing of by my husband, something he won in a foreign land. I have no mother or brother nor any relation with whom I can take refuge in this sea of woe. Now, everything that Medea says and does in this play, beginning here, is with a purpose, often a hidden purpose. And here, her appeals to the outrage and pity of these women whom she has just met accomplishes the goal of getting them to support her. Because by the end of the conversation, that is exactly what they do. to support the idea of taking some kind of vengeance on Jason. They tell her, "You sailed away from your father's home with a heart on fire. You passed the double rocks of the sea, and now in a foreign country you've lost your rest in a widowed bed and are driven forth a refugee in dishonor from the land." Yes, they fully support the idea that this is unjust and that Jason should pay. And she has gained the support of this chorus enough so that now Medea feels she can confide in them and get them to agree to remain silent when she discloses her rather ghastly plans on how to punish Jason. But those are plans that are evolving and that she has not yet formulated fully yet. But even without disclosing these plans that she is still in the process of formulating, as I've noted, she has gotten these women to support the idea of some kind of even violent revenge, because it's as if they would be gaining some vicarious satisfaction for their own mistreatment by men through her revenge, and they don't back away from it. You are in the right, Medea, in paying your husband back. I am not surprised at you for wanting to do so. Yes. Okay. Now, I hope you note that Medea has a special talent for knowing just where people are vulnerable and appealing to that vulnerability in order to manipulate them. In this case, of course, it's the chorus of women's secret resentment at their husbands, okay? But we will see that with others, she strikes exactly to the heart of where they are weak or vulnerable, even more immediately. Particularly, we see this talent on display when she meets with Creon, who enters to announce that he is banishing Medea and explain why. This is the scene in the Zoe Caldwell production of Medea using a different translation that I sent you with the email and that I hope you enjoyed. She's a incandescent Medea. Now, Creon has good reason to distrust Medea, given her past, given her volatile temperament, given her understandable indignation at her husband's betrayal, and given her power as a witch, which she learned because the witch goddess Hecate is a relative of hers and taught Medea all of the mysteries of witchcraft. Thus, Creon tells her abruptly, "Medea, I order you to leave my territories and exile, and take along with you your 2 children, and not to waste time doing it. It is my decree, and I will see it done. I will not return home until you are cast from the boundaries of my land." Why? "I'm afraid of you. Why should I dissemble it? Afraid that you may injure my daughter mortally. Many things accumulate to support my feeling that you are a clever woman, versed in the evil arts, i.e. witchcraft." Okay. Now, faced with Creon's distrust and this firm resolve that he announces to exile her, consider the incredibly clever way in which Medea manipulates and tricks Creon. Okay? She begins with a ploy that she probably realizes isn't going to work, but which she can build on. She says, "Oh, no, you're wrong. You're wrong about me. All my cleverness is not so much. Well then, are you frightened, Creon, that I should harm you? There is no need. It is not my way to transgress the authority of a king. How have you injured me? You gave your daughter away to the man you wanted. Oh, certainly I hate my husband, but you, I think, have acted wisely. Nor do I grudge at you that your affairs go well. May the marriage be a lucky one. Only let me live in this land, for even though I've been wronged, I will not raise my voice, but submit to your betters. No, I will. I'll be good. Just, you're completely wrong about me, Creon." Now, note that Medea does 3 things here. First, she assures Creon that her reputation for dangerous cleverness and witchcraft is overblown. As she puts it, my cleverness is not so much. All right? That's one thing. Second, she tells him that she has nothing personally against him or his daughter, only against Jason. And she promises, finally, to submit quietly to Creon's authority if only he will allow her to stay in Corinth. Now, Creon is not a complete fool, and he rejects all of these arguments very abruptly, probably as Medea figured that he would. What you say sounds gentle enough, Medea. Still, in my heart, I greatly dread that you are plotting some evil, and therefore I trust you even less now than before. No, you must go. No need for more speeches. The thing is fixed. By no manner of means shall you, an enemy of mine, stay in my country. That sounds pretty inflexible. But as I've noted, not only is Medea a genius at recognizing where people are vulnerable, but she is also a woman of enormous deceptive talents and remarkable flexibility. So without missing a beat, she flexibly embarks on a new strategy that manipulates Creon because it fatally appeals to his 2 points of weakness. First, his paternal love for his daughter, and second, his vanity. Here is how she manages it so deftly. Oh, Creon, allow me to remain here just for this one day, so I may consider where to live in my exile, and look for support for my children, since their father chooses to make no kind of provision for them. Have pity on them. You have children of your own. It is natural for you to look kindly on them. For myself, I do not mind if I go into exile. It is the children being in trouble that I mind. Now, note here, Medea knows that she will be capable of avenging herself on Jason in a single day, and she uses the pretext of staying for that single day by claiming she needs that day to find a place to take her children. And she gains that day, that fatal day, by appealing first to Creon's love for his own daughter as a parent. Yes, we're both parents. I need to protect my children and look out for them. You know what it's like as a father. That moves him. But she's also appealing to his vanity because she's flattering him here, fawning on him, unmistakably begging him for this one little favor, just one day. You remember in the clip you saw, Zoe Caldwell even kneels, abases herself, and this appeals to Creon in much the same way it would appeal to Agamemnon when Clytemnestra flatters him, which leads him, even though he knows he's making a mistake, to step down on the red carpet. Well, by the same token, succumbing to this flattery, Creon, like Agamemnon, knows that he's making a mistake. That key word. And yet, he makes it anyway. There is nothing tyrannical about my nature, Medea, and by showing mercy, I've often been the loser. But now I know that I am making a mistake. All the same, you shall have your will. But this I tell you, that if the light of heaven tomorrow shall see you and your children in the confines of thy land, you die. This word I have spoken is firmly fixed. But now, if you must stay, stay for this day alone, for in it you can do none of the things that I fear. You can do none of the things that I fear. Well, that is your mistake there, Creon. She's capable of doing absolutely anything in a day, and she knows that in a single day she can. Now, note that unlike Agamemnon, however, in making this mistake, in succumbing to his own vanity here, Creon is not like Agamemnon, the play's tragic hero, okay? Like Agamemnon, his weakness overrides his judgment, but no, he's a secondary character. He's merely one victim in Medea's scheme. Now, there's a twofold irony in this conversation, and a grim irony. Creon's loving thoughts about his daughter here ultimately allow Medea to kill Glauce, and he will die when he embraces the poisoned girl. So in a certain sense, he's done in and destroyed by his own love. And the second irony is that Medea kills her own children, of course, despite her alleged concern for their welfare. That was completely dishonest. Well, after Creon leaves, Medea exults in exercising her power over him. She's contemptuous of his weakness. He kept saying, yes, I'm resolved, I'm fixed, and yet she bent him. Do you think, she says, I would have fawned on that man unless I had some end to gain, she tells the chorus. Now, Medea also exults at the prospect of revenge, in that the one-day dispensation that he has given her now makes that prospect of revenge not only possible but almost inevitable. The question is, what form should it take? How should she go about it? Well, she addresses the chorus on this question, but she's really debating it within herself when she ponders how to do it. He's given me this one day to stay here, and in this I will make dead bodies of the three of my enemies, the father, the girl, and my husband. I have many ways of death which I might suit them, and do not know, friends, which one to take in hand, whether to set fire underneath their bridal mansion, or sharpen a sword and thrust it into the heart, stealing into the palace where the bed is made. There is just one obstacle to that. If I'm caught breaking into the house and scheming against it, I shall die and give my enemies cause for laughter. No, it is best to go the straight road, the one in which I am most skilled, and make way with them by poison. So be it then, as she thinks her way through this. Now, there are several things to note here. Okay, first of all, for her, the straight way is the deceptive way, because deception is her nature. But note that in this narrative, in this conversation she's having both with the chorus and herself, Medea at first plans to kill Jason. Only later in her planning does she find a more painful way to punishing him by forcing him to live and killing everything that he loved or needed. Second, in this speech, Medea identifies her three targets, but is not sure yet how to attack them. But in thinking her way through it, rejects in particular the direct violence of trying to kill them with a sword at night as impractical, because it could well fail, and she would then be laughed at. So she decides then at the end of this passage on poison for three reasons. First, because she is expert at concocting it, as anyone in the dark arts would be, as a witch. Second, because it can be hidden and used deceptively, as the Russians have recently demonstrated. And third, it is appropriate and right, she thinks, to use poison because this kind of sneaky deception is the special talent, she says, of women in general. What is more, she tells the chorus, you were born a woman, and women, though most helpless in doing good deeds, are of every evil the cleverest of contrivers. Contrivance, of course, is a sneaky plot, a plan, a deception. Women have a special talent for that, perhaps because men have made it so difficult for them in every other way that they must find subterranean means. Now, these frequent comments on gender, on what women must do, and on the oppressiveness of men, make us realize that Medea is not just attacking Jason and Creon as her particular enemies, but in doing so, she's also attacking patriarchy itself. Thus, Medea vows to use, quote, craft and silence to accomplish these murders. But she adds that if this fails and her own death is certain, quote, I will take a sword and attack my enemies then if I have nothing else. But poison makes it unlikely she would ever have to do that. Now, the last noteworthy thing at this point is that Medea doesn't mention her children in the plot, as she sees it, to poison Creon and Jason and Glace. The children are not yet part of it. While she cannot bear to look at them because she sees Jason in them, and while she's certainly capable of harming them, she's not yet ready to sacrifice her sons to inflict indescribable pain on her husband. Now we come now to Medea's first conversation with Jason. When he first appears, he conforms to what the chorus now says about men in general. Quote, their pledges are loose. Men are faithful cads, and Jason exemplifies this. If, as Medea holds, women are skilled at contrivance and deceit, it seems they are because men have forced them to behave in these indirect ways for their own survival. Well, Jason has dishonestly broken his marriage vows, and Medea is bitter that her love blinded her to his intrinsic dishonesty when he arrives. She regrets it. She says, a distinguished husband I have for breaking promises. When in misery I am cast out of the land and go into exile, quite without friends, and all alone with my children. That will be a fine shame for the new wedded groom. Why is there no mark engraved upon men's bodies by which we could know the true ones from the false ones? Okay, it's too bad that I didn't see what a cad, what a liar he was. Now, Jason's first speech reveals just how false and dishonest he continues to be even now. He says, "This is not the first occasion that I've noticed how hopeless it is to deal with a stubborn temper, Medea. For with reasonable submission to our ruler's will, you might have lived in this land and kept your home. As it is, you're going to be exiled for your loose speaking. Not that I mind myself. You're free to continue telling everyone that Jason is a worthless man. But as for your talk about the king, consider yourself most likely that exile is your punishment. I, for my part, have always tried to calm down the anger of the king and wished you to remain. But you will not give up your folly, continually speaking ill of him, so that you're now going to be banished as a result. All the same, and in spite of your conduct, I'll not desert my friends, but have come to make some provision for you, so that you and the children may not be penniless, or in need of anything, in exile. Certainly exile brings many troubles with it, and even if I hate you, Medea, I cannot think badly of you." Oh my God, what a tissue of lies. There's not a single truth in any of these claims. All of this is under the guise of sensible thought and generous concern from Medea, but it is neither generous nor sensible. From the start, Jason blames her upcoming banishment on her public complaints rather than blaming himself for abandoning her. Does he really believe any of what he said, or is he just defending himself against his guilty conscience? I think it's probably the latter, because note, he says these things before Medea even accuses him and challenges him. Clearly, he's feeling guilty. But consider the falsehoods. First, Jason made it clear, Creon made it clear that he planned to send Medea away even before he knew of her conduct of protestations and anger. That was established, he made clear from the beginning. So it's not that she is being exiled because of her bad behavior. Okay? A second lie is that Jason clearly does mind Medea slandering him, even though he claims he doesn't. He's embarrassed and he's angry, as well as guilty. Third, Jason has shown absolutely no sign of looking out for the children the way he claims he has. He says he's concerned about their welfare, but he's done nothing to indicate that. Fourth, when he finally concludes, "I'll never think badly of you, Medea, even though you may hate me," he's trying to claim the moral high ground here without any admission of wrongdoing. But indeed, he does think badly about her, and that's fairly clear. Jason disavows all moral responsibility for Medea's grief and rage, all in an attempt to justify himself and eschew his own guilt. Well, Medea's response is a withering denunciation intended not just to defend herself, but to humiliate Jason and make him suffer by listening. She says, "I can speak ill of you and lighten my heart, and you will suffer while you are listening to me now, Jason. And first, I will begin from what happened first. I saved your life, and every Greek knows I saved it. Who was a shipmate of yours aboard the Argo when you were sent to control the bulls that breathe fire and yoke them, when you went to sow the deadly field? I did. And for the golden fleece, I killed the many-folded serpent that guarded it, that never slept. I killed it, and so gave you the safety of the night. And I betrayed my father in my home, and I killed my brother," she says. "Yes, I killed him, and then when we got back to your home, I persuaded the death of Peleus with a more dreadful death at his own daughter's hands. I persuaded his daughters to kill him so that you could take the throne. But no, you blew it instead. And this is how I behaved to you, you wretched man, and you forsook me. You took another bride to bed, though you had children with me. For if that had not been, you would have had an excuse for another's wedding. Faith in your word is gone. Indeed, I cannot tell whether you think the gods whose names you swore by then have ceased to rule, and that new standards have been set up. Since you must know you have broken your word to me. Oh, my right hand and the knees which you often clasped in supplication, how senselessly I am now treated by this bad man." All right. Medea wants to injure Jason by forcing him to confront the guilt that he bears for betraying her and the children, and that he's been trying to deny or suppress. And she does this by recalling all she did for him and what he owes her for getting the fleece, and afterward, even getting him to the throne of his own homeland. But it's not just that she wants to torture him by recalling the guilt. She also wants to punish him with shame. Shame is different from guilt. Guilt is a private transaction with our own conscience. Shame is the exposure of our wrongdoing publicly, okay? And she wants then not just to prick his conscience, but to expose him publicly, now before the chorus, for abandoning her and the children as they face exile. Remember that the chorus, is witnessing this conversation, which must be embarrassing to Jason. Medea also, of course, wants the chorus to hear of how he inflicted pain upon her and how she is now inflicting pain upon him. She notes that Jason swore to the gods when he married her that he would be her husband and love her, and now he's betrayed that, and she says, well, you'd better be careful because they still rule and those gods will punish you. Thus, the chorus should bear witness to this. He will be punished. He deserves to be punished. Finally, and most devastatingly, Medea, in this very moment, inflicts pain on Jason through sexual humiliation. She reminds him how he used to clasp her knees in supplication like a child when he needed something from her, and how he was afraid of King Peleus when they returned to Icolus, and so she, Medea, arranged that king's death. In short, she did all of these things for him because he was too weak to do them himself. And now she says, oh, you, oh, coward in every way, that is what I call you, with bitterest reproach for your lack of manliness. This is the worst cut of all. Yes, you are a thief, you are a liar, you are an ingrate, you're a deceiver, but above all, you know what? You aren't even a man. You're unmanly. It's all true. And she knows that Jason cannot bear this assault on his masculinity, cannot bear this public emasculation. Well, Jason, nonetheless, is nothing if not a smooth talker. And perhaps that was one reason, ironically, why Medea fell for him when he came to her rustic backward kingdom years before. He dismisses Medea's accusations as, quote, mouthing tempests, and he tries to defend himself against them. First, he says, I was not indebted to you really, but indebted to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, because she, that goddess, made you fall in love with me and thus helped me get the fleece. Quote, it was love's inescapable power, not you, and so I'm really indebted for the golden fleece to Aphrodite, not to you, dear. Second, to defend himself, he says that the claim that I left you here in Corinth as a poor exile and betrayed you here, that's nonsense. You're lucky that I brought you here. I brought you from your barbarian homeland, first to Icolus and now here, and you should be grateful for that. I brought you, quote, to a Greek land where we live by law and civility and where you are known as a clever woman. Again, instead of blaming me, you should praise me. So essentially, Medea, you owe me for bringing you here from, quote, the ends of the earth to a place of civilization. Third, he tries to defend himself in the most outrageous way of all by suggesting that there was actually generosity and purpose in his abandonment. He says, when I arrived here from the land of Icolus, involved as I was in every kind of difficulty, though he doesn't admit that it was his mismanagement that caused him to have to leave his homeland, what luckier chance could I have come across than this, to marry and exile the daughter of the king? It was not the point that seems to upset you that I grew tired of your bed, Medea, and felt the need for a new bride, nor with any wish to outdo your number of children. We have enough already. I'm quite content, but this was the main reason that we might all live well and not be short of anything. I know that all a man's friends leave him stone cold if he becomes poor. Also, that I might bring my children up worthily of my position, and by producing more of them, they'd be brothers and sisters to ours. Okay, now this is indeed outrageous. Essentially, he says, I married Glatze and betrayed you, not for personal reasons, and not because I was tired of you, and certainly not even for political advantage, and not because she was younger, but rather for the sake of the kids, and for that matter, you. This way, because of royal connections, we all have more money, and it will allow me to bring up our children in better, more comfortable circumstances when they get to know the children that Glatze and I will bear. So look at this as an opportunity, he says. Well, there's several problems with this series of defenses. First of all, the difficulties in Antiochus that he vaguely refers to that led him to come to Corinth were problems of his own making. He was a terrible ruler. Second, he made no provision for the children whom he's claiming to want to help. Indeed, he was ready to see them cast off with no indication that he was in any way trying to get Creon to accept them as putative brothers to the children he and Glace would have. Third, the fact is that it's clear Creon wants to establish, as he said, a line of succession through his daughter with Jason, thus the demand that the children leave Corinth. Jason is aware of this, and yet nonetheless claims somehow that the children, if it hadn't been for you, Medea, would be able to stay here like brothers to the children Glace and I will be having. All of this is a fabrication. Finally, his attempted self-justification, his defense against Medea's blistering assault, is one that is especially laughable. He says, "But you women have got into you such a state of mind that if your life at night is good, you think you have everything. But if in that quarter things go wrong, you will consider your best and truest interests most hateful. It would have been better far for men to have got their children in some other way and women not to have existed. Then life would have been good." What is he suggesting? Well, his misogyny here is staggering. He suggests that women, Medea in particular, are prone to jealousy and hysteria. And that is because they are inherently sexually insatiable. They demand sex every night, and women become intractable when a man doesn't provide it for them. Thus, he says, I'm giving it to another woman now. That's why you're mad at me. You're hysterical and sexually jealous because you're being sexually denied. It's too bad we men need women for reproduction, because life would be better without women at all. Okay, now, in all of these respects, of course, he proves himself to be a complete liar. Jason implicitly denies any sexual interest in the princess, as if he is simply above such things. Well, Medea is so disgusted by Jason's self-serving lies that she adds this to his other crimes. His dishonesty only deepens her hatred and her urge for revenge. So again, she attacks his manhood, sensing how insecure Jason is about it, knowing that weak point, as she senses every other individual's weaknesses. And she reiterates it again. She observes, "If you were not a coward, you would not have married behind my back." But we discussed it, okay? Yes. You would have discussed it with me first, at very least, if you were not a coward. But you are a coward, okay? And your claim that you wish to breed a royal progeny of brothers for our children, that is the response of a liar, she says, and a coward. Real men are not liars. Real men are not cowards. Well, Jason is not just a victim, but he is then something worse. He's less than a man. Well, here's a question, though. For all of his faults, does Jason actually love his children, or is he merely claiming concern for their welfare? Well, he's certainly done nothing to persuade Creon to let them stay in Corinth, nor does he seem inclined to offer anything other than maybe money to help get them settled anywhere else. And that seems to be due largely as a need somehow to ease his guilt for deserting them, even though he doesn't admit that guilt. The idea that money and foreign connections will help is more for his own balming his conscience than it is for their sake. But on the other hand, if he didn't love them, then Medea's execution of these two boys wouldn't be such a devastating punishment. No, she knows that he does love them in some way. They are, after all, his flesh and blood. They bear his likeness, and they are also part of his legacy as a man. And because Medea knows this, she knows that in depriving him of those sons, she will strike a blow unlike any other. She sends Jason off with a threat, but it is a threat couched in the will of the gods, though indeed the gods will play little role in it. Medea says, "No doubt you hanker now for your virginal bride and are guilty of lingering too long out of her house. Enjoy your wedding, but perhaps with the help of God you will make the kind of marriage that you will regret. Yes, the gods will punish you, she mentions. It will actually be Medea on her own who will do the punishing. The answer to this will be her own deceit. She will answer Jason's deceit with deceit of her own. The gods will play much less of a role here than they do in Aeschylus or in Sophocles. At this point, to conclude, the chorus realizes something, and is that the depth of Medea's hatred for Jason reflects the depth of the love, the passion she felt for him at one time in the past, and that both that love and her hatred are too strong, excessive. When love is in excess, it brings a man no honor, they say, nor any worthiness. But if in moderation, there is no other power at all so gracious as love. O goddess, never on me let loose the unerring shaft of your bow in the poison of desire. There's again that idea of the importance of moderation, even more than Electra. Medea, in her passion and now in her rage and revenge, is given to excess. And when they speak of the onset of love as caused by Cupid's arrow let loose, the implication is this, that when Cupid, Aphrodite's sidekick, shoots arrows into us, those arrows of desire become what they describe as a kind of poison that completely dominate us, and in doing so violate this Greek ideal of moderation and equilibrium. They destroy love, passionate love, like Medea's, destroys our mental balance. It will cause us to do anything, as it caused her to betray her own father. Well, the chorus invokes this ideal of balance then, much as the chorus in Electra had. Electra's excess emotions, we saw, were extreme grief and then extreme bloodlust. In Medea's case, the extremes, the excesses are extreme passionate love for Jason, and now extreme incandescent vengeful hatred for him. Both Electra and Medea, then, are consumed by a drive for revenge, but Medea will take it even further than Electra, with her own hands. And unlike Electra, she will enact that retributive killing entirely through her own planning. The chorus knows that Medea will be capable of shedding blood, and they fear that, even though they know Jason deserves to be punished. But their sympathy for this wronged woman at this point, for this abandoned woman, outweighs their fears. We'll pick up there next time.